So now I want to discuss my favorite metal albums from the 70s. Now this was always a point of discussion for me with some younger kids. Now, younger kids, we're talking 25 to 35 years old. They're like, oh, well, that's not metal. Well, heavy metal derived from the 70s. What was considered heavy metal back then is definitely not what you would consider heavy metal today. But it's everything. Heavy metal just got, best way to describe it is it got heavier and heavier and heavier, almost to the point where, in the 90s, it just got totally out of control. You have 8 million versions of types of metal, now. Death metal, speed metal, all types, but I don't feel like naming them all, okay? Because I can't remember everything. That being said, so some of these albums fall under like, oh, it's hard rock. Well, back then I remember seeing, like a Circus Magazine special or something like that where it said Aerosmith versus Queen for the battle for heavy metal's kings. Grand Funk was considered heavy metal. If you listen to their albums, they kind of sound blues rockish, but if you hear Grand Funk live, it's like, that's a heavy metal band. So anyway, let's get into, and this I'm sure will be interesting to see your comments and everything, which I will take care of afterwards. So that being said, my number 5 favorite heavy metal album from the 70s, and it's at number 5 because it was a later entry in the late 70s. But I have to give Van Halen 1 a lot of credit. I mean, as a guitar player, Van Halen took all your guitar gods, Eddie Van Halen took all your guitar gods that you loved earlier and just made you go, wow, what the heck? Again, with the exception of Ritchie Blackmore, but we'll get into that later. So for me, I mean, we've discussed this before on a prior broadcast about this album, so I don't want to get too much into it, but this album it's where metal started in a different direction, and so I think this was step 2. This was the beginning of step 2. Step 1, it's argued, what is the first metal song? Is it Helter Skelter? Is it the MC5? And various other bands. So let's progress forward to album number 4 of my favorite heavy metal albums. Cactus, which you just listened to a song, if you could hear it in the background, called Parchment Farm from the album Cactus here, which also ranks in one of my favorite album covers. This album, as you can see, the cactus sort of represents something, and the things hanging around it sort of represent something, and I'm sure there was a part of that was obviously done intentionally, but the Cactus was let's go here. So it was Carmine Appice. They were billed as like America's Led Zeppelin. It was formed after Vanilla Fudge. So Tim Bogart and Carmine Appice had plans to team up with Jeff Beck after Vanilla Fudge, but Jeff Beck was in an accident and they weren't able to do that at the time. So they created this band. They brought in Jimmy McCarty, who's a great guitar player, from Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, and the Buddy Miles Express. And they also brought in Rusty Day, who was then the lead singer from the Amboy Dukes, or maybe, if you want to know better, Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes. And they had the one song that was popular by them was Journey to the Center of Your Mind. So this was a big album. Well, it didn't really sell super big, but it's really, from start to finish, a great album, and one of those albums that make your head scratch and say, well, why didn't this go bigger? I think they had about 3 or 4 albums, and let's see if we could look here. Yeah, they had one, then they had another album after this called One Way or Another, Restrictions in 1971, Hot and Sweaty, and then in 2006 they reunited and had Cactus 5, and they did another album in 2016 called Black Dawn. But anyway, that's Cactus. Enough of that. So, number 3 on my list of all-time, not all-time, I have to keep correcting myself, of my favorite metal albums from the 70s is Led Zeppelin Physical Graffiti. You can look at various songs and things like that from other albums, but this kind of put, this kind of put the heavy metal stamp on Led Zeppelin. Songs like Kashmir, The Rover, Custard Pie, and all that. And again, it really comes down to the fact that Led Zeppelin, you look at heavy metal and say, wow, that's heavy metal. But yeah, again, there was nothing to go on, and this was considered heavy metal and got the title, and again, it grew. I got to keep defending that because metal just went really off the charts as the years passed. So, let's go. I mean, I don't need to discuss this album. I mean, you all know this album probably a lot better than you know the Cactus album. So we can all agree that Physical Graffiti definitely belongs as one of the best metal albums. All right. So, number 2 might surprise you. It's Black Sabbath's debut album, and you probably are thinking, if you're going to have a Black Sabbath album, wouldn't it be Paranoid? I can't argue with you there. Because it had Paranoid, had Iron Man, War Pigs. But to me, I would say this is probably where heavy metal actually started. This album here. The song Black Sabbath, The Wizard, NIB, which supposedly stood for Nativity in Black, but then was refuted, and it wasn't Nativity in Black. It was based on a goatee by, was it Geezer Butler or Bill Ward, that looked like a nib or whatever. I don't know what the reason is. I think they just wanted to shy away from the issue. They wanted to play it up, but with the press, they didn't want to, probably they were told to tone it down. So anyway, for me, this album is, while Paranoid has a lot more popular songs on it, I think this album is probably one of the albums that was the birthplace of heavy metal. And yes, Paranoid, probably better popular songs, but this album is where it started, in my humble opinion. And that leads us, if you're paying attention to the background music, to my all-time favorite metal album from the 70s. And that is, well, this is probably my all-time favorite metal album, period. And that's Deep Purple, Machine Head. This album, Ian Gillan, Lord, Blackmore, this album is, I mean, as a kid, I think, and it'll be something I'm going to discuss later, there are certain songs, I mean, this song will live forever. 1,000 years from now, Smoke on the Water will still be a cool song. So I'm going to look at some of your questions, and hopefully we'll answer it next.